For being here, and welcome to our first Meet the Teachers Zoom meeting for our 2025 Minnesota Quilt Show. Tonight we have Pat Harrison, who is a judge and a teacher, Helen Smith Stone, Beth Ann Nemish, and Elaine Wick Poplin, and each of them will be giving a short presentation, introducing themselves, telling you a little bit about what their specialties are and what classes they'll be teaching. So, um, I guess my recommendation would be we'll go to a Q&A for each faculty as soon as they're finished. So hold your questions if you have any till the end of their presentation, and then we can open it up for questions before we move on to the next faculty member. Um, please try to mute yourself or you will be muted if you're being disruptive. But then yeah, I think that's about all for the introduction. We'll just spotlight our first person which is Pat Harrison. Thank you, Pat.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm calling in from Rhode Island, where it's about 15 degrees, so we have similar weather to you, but I think you get more snow than we do. And in looking up today, I found out that you could fit 71 Rhode Islands into one Minnesota. So we're a very small state. We're a beautiful state surrounded by water and ocean all over the place. Um, and I've been living here since after college. I grew up as a Navy brat living in London, Hawaii, mostly DC, but still love to travel and love to see the designs of things as I travel. I'm originally a garment sewer. I started out my educational life as a home economics teacher, which then transitioned to family and consumer sciences. And after 17 years of that, needed a change, so became a librarian. And that encircled my love of books as much as my love of fabric. As I was a librarian, I wasn't around fabric as much. So when I found that the patterns in the fabric stores were similar to what I'd worn in 7th grade, and here I am in my late 30s, I decided it was time to change into how I use my fabric. So I became a quilter, and I've been quilting for over 30 years. And then in 1999, I became a long arm quilter, and I've been doing that for over 25 years. As a judge, which I'll be doing the first 2 days of the time I'm there, I try to meet the quilter where I believe they are from looking at their quilt, and then evaluate and suggest progression from that. A certified judge is a very positive judge. We keep our comments positive, encouraging, and I can't wait to see all the quilts that will be in that judging room. Then I'll be teaching 3 classes. 2 of them are binding, kind of advanced binding and an embellishment of binding, and then an actual quilt, which I'll show you in a minute. It's the green one behind me, and then a lecture on judging on the Friday. My philosophy of teaching is to simplify, to keep things to a level where everyone, regardless of their learning style, can understand what I'm saying, see examples of what I'm talking about, and succeed. I also encourage. I know for myself, a workshop often can be very distracting with other people's enthusiasm or other people's chatter. So trying to keep the workshop atmosphere as free of distractions as possible, and encouraging to keep that person on task. I also, as a career teacher, like to realize that everyone has a different learning style. And if I find a person who is having a problem, I will then start switching the teaching to different learning styles to accommodate that individual. Because, as I said, we want everyone to be successful. I like calm in the classroom, just as I would with a classroom of kindergartners. Calm is important because many people, I find as we get older especially, can be very distracted. And calm and quiet is many times the best way to learn and, again, to be successful. And most importantly is for people to remember that learning should be fun, and learning in a fun atmosphere is the learning that we remember. So keeping the fun aspect going as well. So these are my little classes that I'll be teaching. On Wednesday, there's a binding 201, which includes piping, a wrapped edge beading, a stem stitch facing, a stem stitch edge and facing. And these are on this little sample I have here. So here's the beaded edge. So it's simply a finished bound edge, and then we wrap beads on it. It just elevates that quilt to say to the judge or to whoever who's looking at that I've taken the time to add something special to the edge. And there was no rush to finish, which is something we see often. We'll also be doing a piping, which is a thin stuffed with a cord that again adds just that final little touch of a nice finish. And one of my favorite edges to add, sometimes after a quilt is actually done, is a stem stitch with pearl cotton. Because I'll look at a quilt and go, it's not quite there yet. And then I'll add a stem stitch of pearl cotton, which gives a pop of color. It could also be added within the quilt as well. Then for the facing technique that I like, it has a very plain, let me flip it this way. You can see it here. It is not one with a fancy triangle corner because I find often those hourglass. It is each side treated separately, flipped over a quarter of an inch, understitched, and then pressed and using a tailor clapper, which really flattens that edge out and keeps it from rolling to the front. This is then applique stitched, and it gives a nice sharp finish with none of the lump or the hourglass effect of some methods. So that's what I'll be teaching in binding 201. Binding 301 is another step further along. And you can see that in the back here. So many times we like to think that we'll add a shaped edge to our quilt. If you're a non-math lover like I am, the thought of doing that kind of math would send you scurrying away. So I've come up with a method of no math, of figuring out how many scallops or how many curves or how many scallops you want to put on that. And then we talk about how to cut the bias. In this particular one, I've had piping from 201. And then we also do prairie points. So a lot to learn in that half-day session. As I said before, adding a little something special to an edge says to the judges, I did not rush to finish this. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And it just adds a lot to that edge. My full day workshop is the quilt you see behind me. And these are scrappy pieced little squares. They're pieced onto a muslin foundation. These were actually, during the pandemic, I think we all did some unusual things. I decided to start saving the leader tails from my customer quilts from their backings. And these are all the leader tails, normally that would go in the trash. So I just started strip piecing them onto muslin, then found a 7-step gradation of green, and then produced the quilt that way. The quilt itself is piece-liqué, and piece-liqué is a method invented sort of, I know all methods have been around forever, but turned into 2 books, one by Dale Fleming, one by Sharon Schomburg in 2002. And these are actually pieced in with the help of freezer paper and school glue. It's a very simple method and a very impressive method because people can't figure out how on earth you did that. So if anyone wants to see my little pictures of how it's done, we can do that in the Q&A. Another aspect of this quilt is the shaped edge. So how to make these little cleavages, as I call them, flat and non-lumpy. Here you can see some of my stem stitch edge. And then I also included an example of value in here. And if you look, probably best to look at the picture on the website, but you'll notice that this purple is the same throughout the quilt. But because the green has gone with a value change of very light to very dark, the purple will start to look like it's changing, even though it is not. One thing I do like to encourage people to consider when they're in a workshop is the importance of value. And this quilt example gives a better example of that when people can actually see it. On the Friday, I'll be doing a lunchtime lecture on the judging process. That will be about a 45-minute PowerPoint with what we look at when we're judging, our philosophy of judging, and why you might, if you are not already having your quilts judged, why you might consider having them judged. I found for myself that it was the fastest way I improved. And when I have judged a quilt guild consistently, they find that you do find that things improve consistently every year. I'm losing my voice. So, anyone have any questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask Pat a question if you have any. Well, guess you gave such perfect explanations. I love your binding classes. I'm looking forward to taking them.
Actually, what I could show now, if you'd like me to, is I can show the little steps for the applique.
Oh, yes.
Because people, often when I do a lecture, people are just flummoxed as to how it is actually done. I don't know if you can see that. Yikes, not very well.
Not very well.
Okay, let's see if I can find one that is better. Well, let me just try to explain it then. So on this one, I try to use a pail so people can see their stitching. But basically what you start with is a freezer paper frame, and that's a double freezer paper. And you cut, so you have about a 10-inch frame, and then you are cutting a circle in it. Then
Okay.
you iron that to the back. You iron the freezer paper frame to the back of your fabric, and then you go around and you cut little clips, just like it's just not going to show. It's easier to work with when you're sewing, but not that way. So then the freezer paper frame is taken off. There are the little clips. The item is school glued together, and then it's taken to the sewing machine and stitched so that you end up with a perfect circle. And it's a very cool technique. And for people who are very, very afraid of appliquing a circle, it is probably the most accurate and easiest method.
It's easier than trying to sew an inset circle, I'm sure.
Right. And it can be, the circle can end up looking like it is reverse applique or applied applique. So it has that flexibility of both looks when you do that. In this quilt, it is done as reverse applique.
Okay, and how big are the circles in that quilt?
I think they ended up at probably 7.5. Cut them
Okay.
oversized, piece the piece in, and then trim to perfection, which is always a good thing.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Pat.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
And now we'll move on to Helen Smith Stone. There we go. You're spotlighted.
Thank you. There we go. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you again. I'm speaking to you from Duluth, Minnesota, where it's cold, but it's beautiful. And we're right on the shores, the northern shores of Lake Superior. Well, actually, the southern shore of Lake Superior, overlooking that beautiful lake. I've been living in Duluth for many years, probably 40 years already. Originally moved here from the St. Cloud, Minnesota area and grew up in southwestern Minnesota. I was inspired to become a quilter by my grandmother, who unfortunately I never met. She passed away before I was born, but I was so excited to be able to see her quilt when I was a young girl, and it was always my goal to become a quilter. And I have been quilt making now for 40 years. I made my first quilt when I was pregnant with my son. And actually, he's got a birthday coming up this week. He's going to be 45. So I guess I've actually been quilting longer than 40 years. My background is similar to Pat's. That's really kind of neat, Pat. I was a classroom teacher and a librarian for many years. And eventually, as time went on, I became a development director and worked for many years in my career at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I also worked as a development director for public television and public radio. So my background is also in the education field. I love to share what I know. I enjoy working with beginners, especially in the quilting world. And I think one of the reasons is because when I first started quilting, I couldn't find someone to teach me. I learned through books. I learned through public television programs. I learned by going to quilt shows and being inspired. And finally, one day, I met a wonderful woman in Duluth, Shirley Kirsch, who's no longer with us, but she became my mentor. And I was very lucky to have met Shirley because from that point forward, I learned and grew and have gone on to become a teacher as well. So the class, well, maybe I should start with Friday during the show because I will be presenting a lecture first. That will be Friday at 10:30 a.m. And it's a PowerPoint lecture trunk show where I show many of my quilts, but especially the ones that I have embellished in one way or another. And I call that lecture Personalizing Your Quilts with Embellishments. I actually started embellishing just a little bit when I was making a quilt that Shirley was instructing. She came into the class, and as we were working on a jewel box quilt, a very traditional quilt pattern, we had cut our fabrics out and we were sewing away, and she came over and she picked up one of the little squares of my quilt and she put in a new one. And she said, add this one to your quilt. This is what's called a humility square. Now, there's different theories about that. Some people don't believe that the Amish people would put in a square that did not belong or a block that did not belong in their quilt, but Shirley believed that they did, and that's what she taught us. So that was the first time that I felt it was okay for me to change a pattern, a quilt pattern, by putting in something original. From that point on, I just started doing it with almost every quilt that I made. I added something to personalize that quilt to make it feel more like it was mine, even if it was a pattern. I wanted it to be special to me, and it helped me develop a story about that quilt. So those are the things that I'll be talking about in that lecture. Here's a couple of quick little examples. if you can see in the guitar, it's a little fuzzy, but if you can see in the guitar, there is a stitched dragonfly. So that's what I added to that quilt. By the way, I too was a long arm quilter for many, many years, for probably about 22 years. And I loved long arm quilting. I only stopped because of an accident that prevented me from continuing on. But I have a very soft spot in my heart for long arm quilting. In this one, I did some thread work to embellish this wall hanging. And then along the inner border, I did some beading by machine, which I learned from another teacher. So just a couple of quick examples of how you can embellish your quilts. I have lots of examples that I'll share in that lecture. So I encourage people to think about that as they're making their quilts, just tweak it a little bit, maybe add a little something that makes it very personal for you. And then on Saturday from 8:30 to 4, I'm going to be teaching a basic, popular quilt pattern, and that's the log cabin that you see right here. I pinned it up onto my New York Beauty quilt just so you could see it a little bit. Very basic piecing, but also a very big, really good for a beginner. I think one of the first quilts that a lot of us have made is a traditional log cabin. It's a wonderful quilt to learn the basics with. So we will be talking about choosing fabric, cutting fabrics, piecing the quilt blocks, very basic machine quilting. I will teach you how to stitch in the ditch. You will either love stitch in the ditch or you'll never want to do it again. But it's a wonderful thing to learn and a good way to start machine quilting. I'll be showing you how to add the binding and also sharing a lot of quilt making tips and tricks along the way. This is a very small quilt. I'll be very happy if my students complete at least 4 blocks during the day, but we'll be talking about lots of things so they can complete their quilt when they go home. Machine quilting on a domestic machine has been a bit of a challenge for me after long arm quilting for so many years, but I love it. And I want to be able to share just some basic skills with my students in that beginning class. So if anyone has a question, I'd be happy to answer those. I really encourage beginners to start with something simple, but yet very beautiful to get them started. And as a seasoned quilter and a seasoned teacher, I would love to be that person in your life that inspires you and helps you keep moving forward.
Thank you, Helen. I think that's wonderful that you're teaching a more beginner-oriented class because that's something we've been asked to have at the show. So many of our classes are beginners feel are too advanced for them. So I think this will be very accessible.
Great. But we also have to start somewhere.
That's right.
And the thing that's fun for me is to help beginners get started the right way.
Yes.
And really get them off to a good foundation right from the beginning. There are so many wonderful techniques and patterns to learn along the way, but I've always felt it's just important to establish that good knowledge as a beginner and establish good practices.
Yes.
And then you can move forward in any direction you want to go.
Once you have the basics done, that's very true.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in the beading by machine.
Yes,
That
that's a
sounds
fun
interesting.
technique.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be happy to talk more about that. And just to illustrate my excitement about embellishments, I wanted to share with you this wonderful embellished chicken that I
It's
made.
adorable.
Look at the beads up there. Isn't that fun?
Oh, that's adorable.
And a nose ring and a
Oh,
necklace that I made for her. And she's got a beautiful pin on the back and lots of feathers. Um, her name is Rosie, named after my mom.
oh,
Um,
how sweet. How
I
fun.
also made another one. His a male, a rooster. His name is Rudy. So I'll be sure to bring those along to my lecture to show too.
Yes, do.
They're so fun because when you do embellishing work, it just opens up your creativity,
It
and
does.
it's
Mhm.
exciting and it's really fun. And we, like Pat was saying in her presentation, we want everybody to really enjoy our art form and to have fun in the classroom and beyond.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. If anyone has any questions, please unmute and pipe in. If not, we'll move on to Beth Ann.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. I am coming to you from Pennsylvania, where it is looking to get some snow this week. So that'll be fun. I've actually missed the terrible cold weather because I just got back from a quilting cruise where I was one of the teachers. So that was a brilliant planning on my part because Pennsylvania got absolutely hammered. So I was very happy to have missed that. Unlike my predecessors, I would say that my grandparents, even though both of my grandmothers did quilt, I would say I'm 0% influenced to get into quilting because of them. I've been quilting since I was 20 years old, which feels very creaky at this point to say that. But I actually started in college, and I am a child of the 80s. I was born in 1973. And we don't really pay attention to the first couple of years. So 80s was like my growing up phase. And my overarching impression of fabric in the 1980s was essentially mom's kitchen wallpaper. That's kind of my feeling about fabric. And so I was very dismissive of it, despite the fact that both of my grandmothers and my mother did quilt, but I wanted nothing to do with it. And it wasn't really until I was in college that I met a woman who I admired greatly at the time, Julia Pfaff, and she was in one of those cool big coffee table books that was like the most influential quilters of the 20th century. And I took a printmaking class from her and a silk dyeing class from her. And what she inspired me was that I didn't have to tolerate materials as they're being handed to me. For example, all these calicos that I perceived at the time was the fabric availability, and that I could change and alter fabric to meet my own needs through printmaking, through dyeing, through all these other techniques. And so that started me off making a few things, but it really wasn't until I moved to Pennsylvania, which I did because I met my husband. We met in Norfolk, Virginia. I was going to graduate school at Eastern Virginia Medical School, which I had a master's degree in art therapy. We met, we moved up here, and I immediately really love the Amish and Mennonite quilting communities. And I'm very close to that in Pennsylvania. My farmer's market, I have to vie for a parking spot with a horse. So that's kind of how close I am to that kind of area. And I walked into a quilt store while I was looking for my first job as a therapist, and I was overwhelmed by how much the fabric industry had changed while I hadn't been paying attention. So this would have been about 1990, late 97. And the fabric industry had completely like balled itself up and pitched itself out and reinvented itself in those few years. And I was overwhelmed by the joyful color and the imports and batiks, especially batiks. And I was immediately struck by the quilting bug. I was, though, very, very influenced by the Amish quilting genre with the very large, simple types of piecing with beautiful quilting. And that influence has carried through my entire show quilt career. I've been a show quilter for a really long time, and I have a very big portfolio of show quilting. But also even my more contemporary things where I'm not quilting for show per se, but I'm teaching, is that love of simplicity, big open spaces to really play. While I feel like I can piece and I do piece well, my preference is to piece as little as possible and leave as much space as possible to just really go nuts with the quilting. I teach both long arm quilting and sit down machine quilting, and I keep my skills fresh with both. I have 3 machines here in my studio. I work on a Janome um, Continental M7. I work on a Handy Quilter Amara, and I work on an A1 long arm. And I just rotate through these so that I'm, able to be as nimble as possible for my students. I've actually prepared a little slideshow. I'd like to share that with you to show you the classes that I'm going to be doing, talk a little bit about some of the special techniques. So if you'll just bear with me while I sort of stare vapidly here at the screen and get that slideshow started for you. And let's see, we need to play that as a slideshow. There we go. So we obviously know what my name is at this point. So the first class that I'm going to be teaching is going to be on Wednesday, which is a 6-hour sit-down machine quilting class. I am teaching on the sit-down machines at the show. However, if you're a long armor and you've just been desperate to take a class with me, you're more than welcome. I promise that it's almost as doable. If you're a long armor, you will have, a little bit of frustration as you're sort of getting reacquainted with moving your hands and moving the quilt instead of moving, your big long arm like a pencil. But I have many, many folks who bridge between sit down and stand up quilting within my classes. And I'm, 100% ready to accommodate you and help you out. Quilted Texture from A to Zen was a class that was inspired while I was teaching. And one of the organizers of a particular show asked me if I would consider making a background class. And initially I said no. And I said no because I felt like there were a number of really excellent background machine quilting classes available. And I didn't want to just sort of rehash over that same material. So I began to ask myself, what could I do? What was different about me to add to that experience or to that sort of body of work? And eventually, what came to me is that as an artist, I look at everything just from a very artistic, textural way. And so I began to think about the inspiration of just the world around me, particularly all the different natural textures, nouns. I literally went to the dictionary and like, oh, that's a great noun. I can think of a cool thing for that. And began creating many, many backgrounds that just aren't the type of thing that are in typical classes. And so that's where the genesis of this came from. I will say that my tree guy sort of saved that whole concept because I was working on the letter X and there just aren't a lot of great, X words. There's X-ray, there's after that, it's really tough to say. And my tree guy kind of came in and I had all this stuff spread over the table and he's like, what are you working on? So I told him, he's like, oh, that's easy. Xylem. Xylem is the cellular structure of a woody plant. And I thought, brilliant, because cells equals bubbles. And, if you go and just research any macro photography, you'll never run out of bubble shaped textures to put together. So that's where this class comes from. So we'll be doing a little romp through the alphabet, one for each letter, being inspired by natural textures. But the other thing that's a little bit different about this class is that many designs that we're going to be learning are not necessarily what we would call like an edge-to-edge meander style design. They actually use guidelines to help shape and inform our quilting decisions. That also is what makes that a little bit different. So this is a really fun class for me to teach. It is a pretty high density quilting. And it is one where you do need to have some, free motion machine quilting experience to really enjoy. Here's a couple of little samples that are sort of the types of quilting that folks then take the just sort of boxes that we'll do in class, but then use those types of designs in real quilts and how they can blend and morph together. So here's a couple of examples from other classes of mine. Nemishing is going to be a 4-hour sit-down class. Now, the name Nemishing was foisted on me by Karen McTavish, thank you, during a show. We were working together and I had been doing this filigree background mixture of feathers and pebbles. It's very organic. And why I like it is because even though I do a lot of elaborate quilting, I actually am inherently pretty lazy and I don't want to pre-mark anything. And so the idea of just having this beautiful freeform feather that is so organic was very appealing to me. And I was doing it a lot at the time on client quilts, and showing it online at the time, which is a long time ago before Facebook even existed. We had little chat room groups. And in any case, so she kind of teased me into calling it this because of her name. Um, and I had to have a name for this class. So, like any good quilt teacher, I made a book, a self-published book, and I take this to my local quilt shop, which is an Amish quilt shop. And the woman who runs it, her name is Anna Mae Martin, and she speaks in a beautiful Pennsylvania Dutch accent. And she says to me, "Oh, namishing, you know what that means." And I thought to myself, "Oh God, what have I done?" I'm sure it's terrible. And she says, "Oh, in Pennsylvania Dutch, nay means to sew and meshing means machine. So your name literally means machine sewing." So now I'm definitely stuck with calling it this. But this is just my take on basically a signature look. So in this class, we're going to learn the steps of how I evolved a number of feathers, choosing a design pattern of 5 feathers that I like to make, and creating a signature look. But then we're going to sort of do a riff on that idea and help you find a couple of feather shapes that you enjoy and have you apply that to the same process to maybe help you find a look that you feel comfortable with a similarly looking feather, but maybe feels a little bit more personal. So that's what we're going to be doing in that class. Now, I also have a lecture that I'll be doing. I've been asked to bring my yarn couching collection with me. So that will be predominantly a little fashion show of all of my they're not quilted, but all of my yarn couched coats, as well as a couple of quilts and probably a few small things that I can hand around. I'm a little bit hampered by how much luggage that I can put on an airplane, but I assure you that it's going to be just a wonderful show. Yarn couching is, in my opinion, a side quest of free motion machine quilting. And so I like to tell people if they can move their hands like this and like this, then they can yarn couch. That's all there is to it. Um, Yarn couching is the art of trapping a piece of yarn between the needle and the surface of whatever it is that we're deciding to work on. And we use clear thread running through our machine. So we invest in a foot, which usually ranges anywhere from $30 to $60. And then you go crazy with your yarn and you can be doing yarn couching as well. So I look forward to sharing my yarn couching journey with you. Here's a couple of extra pieces just to kind of give you a sense of a few of the pieces that I will be bringing with me. The one on the left of the cockatoo is no longer in my possession. Unfortunately, it was adopted at the Houston International Quilt Festival in the auction. So that one is gone, but I have its big brother, which is these two that fly towards each other along with me, as well as numerous coats. Now, another class that I'm going to be working with you on is, again, a 6-hour all-day class. It's a nice, relaxing pace of formal feathers. I would say that probably feathers are my number one love, and then going crazy with background quilting would be right up there, neck and neck. They trade places, but I'm pretty in love with both. So this class is all about really capturing the formality of a feather, tips, tricks, tweaks that we can do to really make it picture perfect. We're going to work with 2 different types of feathers and help you find which one suits you the best. Learning about grading feathers and all the tips on getting their little heads to line up with good dips in between them and nice, long, beautiful, graceful tails. These are all of the things that I've been perfecting over my entire quilting career, but especially in my show quilt world, bringing those to the table and helping you really, you know, find the best way for you to be making just beautiful feathers. Not only flowing feathers like the one I have pictured here, but also different types of formal applications, talking about different types of shapes, common block styles, common border applications of formal feathers. So I hope you'll consider joining me for that. The last class is Blooming Botanicals. It is, again, a 6-hour, nice, relaxing pace that we're going to be working. And I will be teaching you free motion floral quilting. And I'm going to convince you that all flowers are the same flower and all leaves are the same leaf, whether they are a little wild rose or a hibiscus or an iris. And I promise you that I'm really good at convincing you to do this. And you will be quilting gorgeous floral shapes freehand with no marking by the end of the day. One of the centerpiece here is sort of a meandering style feather, and I think you can maybe see along the edges there a bit of a border. And then let me click over here. All different shapes. We see a poppy here, a little sort of wild rose, a little bit of a poinsettia on the left. On the right, flowers inspired maybe by block printing or perhaps a little William Morris-esque in terms of their style. All kinds of beautiful flowers, all done with very little to no pre-marking of our quilted line itself. So I hope that you'll consider joining me for this class as well. All right, let me exit this. There we go. Hope that we're back to having full view here. So I really hope that you'll consider joining me for my classes. I'm hoping to have just a really fun experience with bringing lots and lots of samples up. And then when the show is over, I am very excited to explore your state. My son is going to meet me and we are going to go hiking up at, or actually probably boating up at Voyagers. And we have booked a tour to get over as well to Isle Royale. And so that will be check. Numbers 40 and 41 off of my personal list of going to all the national parks. So again, thank you for the opportunity to not only come and speak with you, but to advance my desires to visit all the national parks.
That's wonderful. I hope you enjoy it up there. I haven't been
Thank
to
you.
Isle Royal yet, but definitely the Boundary Waters are beautiful.
It is very difficult to get to.
Mhm.
Your choices are a 2-hour ferry out of Grand Marais, how do
All
you say
right.
that? Yes. A 6-hour ferry out of some other place much further away, or a seaplane, which is a hard no for me. So we're opting for the 2-hour ferry, which is a pretty short trip. You've only got about 4 hours on island, but it'll be enough for me to like earn my little
Check it
sticker,
off
I
your
think.
list. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. So, as far as your classes go, are they more intermediate or are any of them more aimed towards I don't want to say a beginner, but someone who isn't as advanced?
So I can work with anybody who feels, I would say, confident beginner to intermediate and up,
Hmm.
and then help push people if they're more advanced, push them a little bit harder to, like work more, or help tone it down by just manipulating the class content. My classes, though, are not appropriate for somebody who still is in the, I'm not sure about how to move my quilt, how to
Right.
physically operate through the process of sit down machine quilting. So you do need to, be, well enough acquainted with the process to maybe be able to do smooth stippling, pebbles, a few of those types of designs. You'll be more comfortable. Of all of them, it is the floral class, though, that would be the most broadly sort of accessible to everybody, where you need the least amount of precision, I guess, with that
Okay.
particular class.
Great.
Are there any questions that anybody has? It's been a very question light
It
session,
has
so
been.
I have a question. Are
sure.
you using rulers?
I'm not using rulers in any of my
Not
classes.
really. Okay.
No. Well, there was like this many spots, and it turns out that I can't teach for you guys for 3 weeks. I've only got just those couple of days.
I just the work looks the lines and stuff. I just it looked like ruler work, and then so I just
In the green sample that you saw, there was some examples of feathers maybe touching some ruler work, but in the formal feathers class itself, no, I wouldn't specifically focus on that. But once you understand like how to make really good quality feathers and how to properly stick them onto stuff, then you can stick them onto anything. And so learning to properly like split and divide feathers, how to make them illusion overlap, how to grade them into grading overlaps, these types of techniques that you can then apply to a free motion quilted spine, or you could apply just as nicely to maybe peaked arches that maybe would be ruler work. So, learning those techniques is the focus.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I feel like my eyes keep shifting over because I can see everybody's faces off to the side, but I should
That's
stay
okay.
focused in the middle here.
Okay, I don't think so. Thanks very much, Beth
All
Ann.
right. Well, thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
And that brings us to Elaine.
Hello, hello. S-
Welcome. Oh, there we go. You're spotlighted now.
Got it. Okay, hi. I'm coming to you from Alabama, where it is not cold. It is 62 degrees outside right now, although we did have 5 inches of snow a couple weeks ago. Very exciting. The grocery store cleared out, as always. People go in there and they buy their bread and they buy their milk, and everybody panics, and then it's 5 inches of snow. But that's how we are. Um, My dad's family is from Minnesota. My grandmother was born in Two Harbors and grew up in International Falls. And my grandfather was Minneapolis and then Spencer, Iowa for high school. And then he went back to University of Minnesota for college. So I have ties up there, even though I'm not from there. Um, but I'm always hot, so I always wonder why I live here because it's absolutely miserable in the summer. I'm a retired high school math, computer science, and yearbook teacher, but I have a degree in biology, and I was raised by an artist and a physician. So I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I'm pretty sure a quilt teacher is closer than I've ever gotten before. So I've been sewing and embroidering since I was a child. I made the first quilted item, a pillow in Girl Scouts when I was 8. And then all of my prom dresses, my wedding dress, futon covers, baby clothes, garments for myself, you name it. And then I took an actual quilting class instead of just sponging off my mother in 1999 and started free motion quilting in 2002. And I now have a long arm, and I'm just starting to dabble in developing that business. So I've been um, teaching quilting classes for about 15 years on request. I've been in magazines and books and quilt shows. And if you saw the McCall's Quilting last Christmas, or actually 2 Christmases ago, November, December 2022, the 3-dimensional Christmas tree with integrated lighting, that was mine. And it came from an idle wondering during the pandemic, and then just this year-long odyssey of insanity, and I made that thing. So, I will be presenting 4 classes, and some of them are kind of math nerdy and some of them are not, but I promise there's no quiz at the end. I was a math teacher, but I'm not going to be teaching quilting that way. I like to say that when I was teaching high school, I was selling to unwilling buyers, and they did not want what I was selling, but they had to buy it, whereas quilters show up voluntarily. So it's a much easier situation to teach. In 2022, I started a partnership and became an ambassador with Cherrywood. So your Minnesota friend, Carla. And I've been able to travel with them a few times, and I taught in Paducah for them last year. And I've been teaching online and in person simultaneously for them. And I'll be doing that again in April of this year. So the pandemic skills that I developed teaching high school have really come in handy, and I had no idea that would ever be the case. But I do have a slideshow also, so let me start to share that. Hold on, where did it go? Well, Why are my pictures not coming up? Is that, you guys can't see that, I bet.
Not yet, no.
Darn
You
it.
have to share your screen or share the app.
Okay, well, here we go. Are we there?
Yeah, there's
Yay.
some pictures.
Okay, online I'm known as Messy Goat. So that has nothing to do with the state of my sewing room, or originally it didn't, but now it kind of fits. Um, so if you've been online and you've seen Messy Goat anything anywhere, then that's me. So the classes I've got are Fibonacci Squared. That one is on Wednesday, the 18th. It's an all-day class, and it is a pattern that I wrote the one time that my two girls, who are now 21 and 23, the one time they took a nap at the same time. One time I designed this quilt. And it is probably my most popular pattern. It is just Fibonacci is a mathematics uh, phenomenon that is very, very seen in nature. I will go off into the weeds and explain it, but I won't do it here. I'll do that in the class. Save that for so that there's something to look forward to, right? But what you'll need are 13 fat quarters or half yard cuts. This class is suitable for beginners. It is only rectangles and squares being sewn together. And while you don't have to use solids, you can use tonals and prints, but you want to keep things that have a consistent color throughout. So good batiks or solids, tonals, that sort of thing would be really effective. In the class, I'll show you how to sort through. This is in the Paducah class when I was teaching online and in person at the same time. And I'll walk you through how to sort the fabrics so that you get a consistent flow. And we'll even talk about the quilting applications that you could use to finish a piece when you are finished with the quilt. This is the original one that I made in 2015, I think. And then I decided to upsize it and I made it bigger. And the Fibonacci sequence actually is very helpful with this. And it was very easy to make bigger. So you can have a throw, which is the 55-inch square, or you can have pretty much a queen size 89-inch square, depending on how much fabric you choose to bring. And there's my cat. This is Friday. He likes to show up on everything when I'm working on it. But I thought that one showed the contrast really well, just the dynamics of that quilt. And this was the quilting I did on the original. And I had a lot of fun discovering mathematical truths about this particular number sequence that kept happening and kept surprising me, even though I've been playing with the Fibonacci sequence for over 20 years. I keep learning new things, and that was fun. And there's the big one. And one of my students in April didn't want to put hers on point, and she did this in a 5-hour class. So it is possible to get all of the blocks. So she had one block left to put on the back. It is possible to get all of the blocks done in one class. So I thought that was great. Lots of fun. So the second class is on Thursday. It's another all-day class. This one is called Awakening, and it is suitable for beginners again. Even though it is curves, it is very, very forgiving, and I'll show you how to troubleshoot through any problems that you might have. When you get to class, I'll tell you to put the seam ripper away. There's a time and a place, and this is not it. So we will work through problems without a seam ripper in most cases. There are some times where you kind of have to give in and just get out the seam ripper and walk through. But this is a fantastic quilt that I have made and made and made and made, and my husband would really rather I please not make it anymore, because you can use any kind of fabric you want, and it is so much fun to play with this concept. And that is the quilt that I made from the fabrics that I started with on the last two photos. You can even do it with prints and batiks and leftovers, tiny little scraps. As long as you have a piece that is 7 inches by 10 inches, it is big enough to use. And it doesn't, you have some waste, but not a huge amount of waste. That's not a very large trash can. So it's a great way to use stuff up. So this one is just tiny, small scraps of batiks that my daughter asked for a dorm quilt in, and it is fast to do and addictive. This is another one. I was trying to show different ways to lay them out, and I made them spin, and then finally went with light in the center and made a small table runner. You can also do prints. And I had a lot of fun with that. These are all the same fabrics, by the way, as in the last photo. So I took all the blues out, but these are all the same fabrics. Those aren't finished yet. They're in one piece, but I haven't quilted them yet, but I will have them in June. And then partial block down is a half-day class. This is a quilt that I made during lockdown and decided to be punny when I named it. Because it is made with partial seams. And you can see there's Carla Overland right there, right under my hand, and her husband, John, were in the Houston booth last year. But this is a shockingly easy technique to do. I've had beginners show up in this class and go home with 4 or 5 partial seam blocks done. And they're just, I never knew this wasn't hard. You know, they were intimidated by partial seams, and this entire quilt goes together with partial seams. And it's not terrible. So you can use scraps, you can use yardage. You just want at least 8 fat quarters so that you get some good variety. And as long as you're a confident beginner, I know my pattern says intermediate, but as long as you're a confident beginner, since you've got me there, absolutely it is suitable. So any combination of fabrics. So I used batiks again for my other daughter going off to college for a dorm quilt. And there's the finished piece. So I don't have that when it's in Kentucky, but you can even use Tula. I wanted to see, so I made one in Tula, and then I made another one in batiks, and I think I'm done making this one for a while. So, but this is something a student did, and she made all 4 blocks that she did in class identical to each other, and I had not tried that. And so, of course, I had to go home and play with it. That's the same 4 blocks. I just turned them different directions. So there are lots of ways to play, and we will play. There's a lot of play in my classes. And my last one is Outspoken. This is probably my most popular class at this point. It is an all-day class, and you come with something to say, and you'll go home with quite a few letters done. I had a couple classes where people went home with complete words, and it's been good. So there's the Cherrywood booth again. Be brave, be strong, be kind. That was a phrase I said to my girls every morning when dropping them off in elementary school. And when I was making all of the letters and the letter forms for this class last year, I was looking for fun ways to look at all the letters instead of, the quick brown fox jumps over, because that's boring. And I love this one, 5 boxing wizards jump quickly. So great. So this one is suitable for beginners. Solids and prints work great as long as your contrast is good. That is the most important thing. So if you have a floral fabric that has lights and darks in it, that's one to leave at home this time. So you want things that have a consistent look so that they play light or they play dark, but not that do both. And there's the full alphabet. And this was the quilt that started it. I put that up on Instagram, and people went nuts asking me to teach them how to do it. So that one was in Paducah last year. and in Grand Rapids. So if you went to either of those shows, you might have seen it. And there's quilting. We'll discuss different ways to quilt these. And here's another one. This one's very big. I don't recommend selecting a phrase that long. We're going to go with something small. Welcome. This took a while, but these were student work. So these letters were, she chose a very limited color palette and it was very effective. We got more and more excited the more letters she did. And this one, create art. And there's my handout. You can kind of see it over there. And Prince work. That was a very exciting moment. She said she was going to go for it and see how it went. And I had meant to try mine with Prince. I just hadn't done it yet. So that was a great, great discovery. And then these letters were really, really big. So you can size up the plans and size them down. My handout intentionally does not have measurements in it anywhere, so that you really will improv, because I know quilters, like I know teenagers, you will follow directions, you will follow a recipe and not play if following a recipe is where your comfort is. So if I don't give you a recipe, you can't follow it. I give you a plan, but not a recipe. And then she had fun combining prints and solids. And you can even use my plans and create lettering that isn't wonky. And you can do dark lettering instead of light lettering. So there are lots of opportunities. This was a graduation stole I made for my daughter, who graduated from college this past May. And that is the last of my slideshow.
I like that quote.
It is my favorite quote, which is why I tend to always end any slideshow. So anyone who has seen me before is likely sick of that quotation. But are there any questions for me?
I'm curious how you got connected with Cherrywood. How did that start?
During the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, they had a program where you could, like a monthly shipment where you could get a series of their fabrics. And I did that. And I have a policy, personal policy. Every fabric that comes into my sewing room, no matter how big, how small it is, I cut off a 2.5-inch strip. Always, before I put it away. Because then I don't have the, oh, but I can't cut into that. I've never cut into that. I don't know. I don't want to use it because I'm waiting for the perfect thing. I can't use it. I haven't, I've already cut into it.
Okay.
And so I play with that fabric. And so I started playing with my 200 some colors of cherry wood. And every time I did, I would tag her.
Oh, okay.
And eventually she noticed. And so she says it was her idea. I say it was mine. We're both right. It's great.
Yes, that's great, great partnership. Yes.
A nice symbiosis, and it's been a lot of fun. It really has. And obviously we're both okay
Yeah.
with outrageous hair. So
Yeah. And is that Cherrywood behind you too?
it is.
That's beautiful.
Actually, I'm teaching this for them. I would have put the everyone yells up, but these are loose. And so I didn't want to knock them down. But I am teaching that in Paducah, and I'm pattern testing right now because the pattern will be ready by the end of this month.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
so I was pattern testing my diagrams and instructions over the weekend and then put them up and then was conflicted. It's a good background. So, but that's all 200 some colors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Every single one of them. Because they did a display in their booth at Market and used half of a fat quarter. So they had a fat eighth, I guess, left of every single color. So she sent them to me because
Oh.
I like to use scraps, obviously.
Yes.
And so I'm
You
using every
make good, great use of them. That's wonderful.
I joke that Carla sends me her trash and
Yeah.
she's I really should stop saying that because it's not trash.
For leftovers. That's great.
Yeah. No, I love it. She's giggling, I'm giggling, everybody's happy.
Mhm. Everybody's happy.
Absolutely.
Well, does anyone have any questions before we close?
I'm
Nobody's.
just very excited to be coming up there in June when it's just starting to get blistering hot here. So
Oh, I bet.
oh,
Yes,
it'll be a nice reprieve.
it will be. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Um, Elaine, Beth Ann, Pat, and Helen, thank you so much for being here and letting us record you and talking about your classes. I'm sure it'll be great opportunity for people who were here or who weren't here. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel shortly. So thank you very much.